then come on across to me.
Tonight on The Experience, we will be reacting to the news that everyone in the world is reacting to, and that is the death of Osama bin Laden. Also, we'll be joined by some members of the Worcester Historical Society as they talk to us about an exciting new exhibit that they have. And we are first joined here by a professor from Holy Cross, as will be our next guest as well. But you're here to talk about some very exciting news that millions of Catholics around the world were tuned in yesterday during the day to what was happening in Rome. And we now refer to him as His Holiness John Paul II.
Yeah, the Blessed John Paul II. It was a day of quite great celebration, and I think in many ways it's very interesting that John Paul's successor was able to beatify him. I mean, it represents in some ways a kind of throwback to older forms of canonization and beatification where it was done by popular acclamation on the local level.
But this really was fast-tracked when it came to Pope John Paul. What about that? Is that something that now some people are taking a look at and saying, maybe it should not have been done or put on the fast track?
Well, I think certainly some people feel that way simply because we have still more to learn about how much John Paul II knew with regard to the sexual abuse scandal, particularly with the Legionaries of Christ. But for most Catholics, this is a ratification of a tremendous amount of popular affection toward the former pontiff. And so in many ways, it's simply being ratified through these religious rituals. Yes.
There were already the chance, really, to make it happen and to make him a saint. What are the steps that one goes through to become a saint?
Well, first there is an investigation of the candidate's virtues. And if the virtues are considered to be heroic, as they were in John Paul II's case, the person is named a servant of God. Then the next step is beatification, which comes upon a miracle that's attributed to the intercession of the servant of God. And that allows what's called a local cult surrounding the blessed and a feast day in his or her honor. The last step is canonization, where the person becomes a full-fledged saint after another miracle is proven.
All right, so we have the one miracle right now, and this was that he healed someone.
Right, a French nun suffering from Parkinson's disease, which is what John Paul II also suffered from. And so in many ways, John Paul II is the patron saint of suffering. He always talked about a modern society that could not find a place for those who suffer. And he himself, of course, suffered greatly before his death. And so in many ways, his own witness and his own heroic virtues, as they're perceived by Catholics, relate to his experience of suffering.
Tell me about the steps with the nun who was suffering from the Parkinson's. Do you have to verify that she had Parkinson's? This is a disease that I suppose perhaps could come back, and she is still with us. It seems interesting, I mean, that we talk about sort of this modern miracle.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even within Catholic circles, there's a little bit of debate over whether the identification of a miracle is essentially saying there are limits to human knowledge, or it's actually proof of the supernatural. In this case, and what happens in all cases, there's an investigation at the diocesan level that involves medical specialists and so forth, and then that is forwarded to Rome. And so there are several different levels of review. And in this case, it seems to me that the review actually was fairly thorough, even though John Paul II himself was fast-tracked, and that the review is coming very quickly after his death. But nonetheless, there were several processes of review in this case.
Can it be overstated what Pope John Paul did for the Catholic Church? It certainly seems as if he brought millions of young people to the faith, and the excitement that surrounded him as a universally loved figure.
Yeah, certainly. I think John Paul II did try to reestablish a monarchical papacy in many ways. But he was also quite a populist and very much attuned to trends and themes within world Catholicism, particularly among the young. And so that is the core in many ways of his appeal. I mean, he was a charismatic figure, but also had a common and personal touch.
What is the power the papacy. I mean, what is it today? What was it when Jean Paul, was Pope? Because you talked about this monarchical Pope. Did he bring back quite a bit of the power to it?
I think he did, certainly. I mean, both in terms of its persuasive or witness power and in terms of its administrative power, certainly. I think the Pope is obviously, for Catholics, the Vicar of Christ, and so the Pope obviously has a central role within Catholicism as a whole. But what John Paul brought back in some ways was a more intense dedication and focus on the Pope's person and his own individual witness. And that had to do with his charisma and also his understanding of the Church and where it needed to go in the third millennium.
What do you think it will mean when he is canonized, when he does become a saint?
Well, I think it'll be another cause for celebration, and I think it'll raise a lot of interesting issues then about how his legacy is defined. Because on one level, there's this popular acclaim that is attached to John Paul II by all quarters in the Catholic world. However, within some sections, for example, some of his actions were taken to be controversial or at least worthy of discussion, particularly in relation to theologians or the handling of the sexual abuse crisis.
And as you bring that up, because I think that is probably what most people will focus on, what is the feeling about his handling of the sexual abuse crisis?
I think the feeling is that he wasn't fully aware and fully informed about all that was going on, and particularly since most of the investigations focused on a close personal friend of his, the head of the Legionaries of Christ, Martial Maciel, that perhaps some in the Vatican dismissed claims of sexual abuse too quickly and didn't bring it to his attention. Others would say that even if he didn't know, he should have known, and the debate obviously will go on. But I think one thing that is true is that even though, as you know, Catholicism in the United States can be very contentious and there are different factions and so forth, even those who may have wanted to debate John Paul II theologically still found him very admirable as a person.
We have just a moment left. You said that there has to be a second miracle proved. What is that second miracle?
Well, we will see. We will see.
Right.
There are discussions about one brewing already, but I'm not informed about the details, so we shall see indeed.
Good. I appreciate you coming by and talking to us about this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Right here on the Hank Stolz Experience. Coming up, we will talk about the major news story in the world today, and that is the death of Osama bin Laden.
We're just seasons out of time. Goodbye, Papa, please pray for me.